General Electric has confirmed to us tonight that it's leaving its headquarters in Fort Point next year.
Can you believe it? In just a few short weeks, a wave of factories, once the pride of American manufacturing, will go dark. Not because they ran out of orders, not because their machines are outdated, but because tariffs are quietly snapping the gears inside America's industrial engine. General Electric, once a symbol of American innovation and power, is now packing up, shutting down plants, laying off thousands, and moving operations to Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. Why? Because they simply can't survive with the cost of raw materials, steel tariffs, and aluminum duties skyrocketing beyond reason. And GE is just the beginning. Right now, we're about to uncover 10 massive factories on the brink of collapse, each one teetering, because the system they relied on is crumbling beneath them. Don't think your job or your life won't be affected. This is a domino storm, and no one walks away untouched. General Electric, if there was ever a symbol that made Americans believe their manufacturing power was unstoppable, it was General Electric. But that symbol is fading fast. And not because the competition is better. No, it's because of invisible costs that are choking every gear of its industrial machine. Across the Midwest and Northeast, GE factories are preparing to shut down. Assembly lines that once roared with the sound of progress now sit quiet like industrial graveyards. In a blunt statement, GE confirmed it will cut at least 12,000 jobs and shift major parts of its production overseas. The reason, in just the last 3 months, steel tariffs on the core material for turbines, generators, and engines have doubled. The cost of production out of control. These factories were once the steel backbone of American industrial towns, where every shift represented a paycheck. A mortgage paid a college tuition covered. But now in places like Erie, Pennsylvania, Schenectady, New York, and Fort Wayne, Indiana, working families are watching their futures evaporate, not because they failed, but because the spreadsheets say keeping production in America equals one thing: losses. And in a global economy where international shipping is now cheaper than domestic import taxes, GE is doing the math and walking away from the country that built it. But this isn't just about job losses. When a GE plant closes, the ripple effects are devastating. Local governments lose a key tax base, workers lose their income. Public services, schools, hospitals, emergency response are thrown into crisis mode. And it goes deeper. GE isn't just shutting down plants. It's also transferring technology supply chains and decades of technical know-how once considered national assets straight into the hands of low-cost foreign markets. So America isn't just losing jobs, it's losing strategic leverage that once fed millions. And here's the hard truth. If GE, one of the oldest and most iconic industrial giants in the US, can't survive these policies, what chance do smaller undercapitalized factories have? Especially those still hanging on dependent on heavily taxed raw materials. Look to the heavy manufacturing sector. The next blow, it won't be a gentle one. Cleveland Cliffs. Just a few months ago, the blast furnaces of the Midwest still burned bright. Steel mills roared with motion, and thousands of workers at Cleveland Cliffs believed they were holding the industrial backbone of America together. But today, what was once a proud monument to American manufacturing is quietly becoming a relic. This collapse didn't come from a natural disaster or a global financial meltdown. It came from steel tariffs, policy decisions that sent production costs skyrocketing while demand shrank under the weight of soaring input prices. From construction to car manufacturing to energy, every sector got squeezed. The price of American steel surged, customers disappeared, and orders plummeted. The warehouses filled up. The machines kept running until they couldn't. In towns like Burns Harbor, Indiana, and Middletown, Ohio, a new scene is playing out: empty parking lots, silent factories, and hiring now signs replaced by "for sale" and permanently closed. Workers who spent their entire lives on the line now stand idle, not because they're unwilling to work, but because there's nowhere left to go. Cleveland Cliffs once prided itself on being a core supplier of flat-rolled steel, the stuff that builds trucks, railways, and refineries. But when those industries started cutting back, the supply chain snapped. And when tariff-driven costs stripped American steel of its competitiveness, companies had to choose shut down or go under. Tariffs were supposed to protect American industry. Instead, they accelerated its retreat. Investments vanished. Factories moved abroad. There was no serious plan for reinvesting in infrastructure. No safety net for retraining the workers left behind. And Cleveland-Cliffs couldn't keep bleeding in silence while its assets vanished day by day. The American industrial dream was melted down in the furnace of bad policy. And now Cleveland-Cliffs isn't just a factory, it's a warning. A steel skeleton of what happens when we choke the very engine that once made this country strong. But here's the chilling part. This silence, this stillness is spreading. The cutters, stampers, and rollers in nearby steel towns. They're starting to go quiet too. Worthington Steel. For many people in Ohio, Worthington Steel isn't just a factory. It's the beating metal heart of the community, a place where the sound of cutters and clashing steel has echoed like a familiar rhythm of life. But now that heartbeat is slowing. And at times it feels like it's stopped altogether. Since early 2025, the plant has cut more than 300 jobs, something that hasn't happened since the 1980s. The reason isn't complicated cold-rolled steel. Worthington's flagship product has been caught in a cost spiral with no escape. Each ton now costs nearly 20% more to produce due to rising raw material costs and input tariffs. Meanwhile, demand from construction and light truck manufacturers, its biggest customers, has been shrinking at an alarming pace. Even more troubling, exports to Canada, Worthington's second-largest market, have plunged by 37% in just 6 months. A surging US dollar has made American steel too expensive to compete. And anyone hoping that domestic demand could make up the difference would be mistaken. Mexican and South Korean competitors are flooding the market with steel priced below US production costs. Veteran workers are now being asked to rotate unpaid leaves, cut hours, even work for free just to hold on to their jobs. But that only delays the inevitable. The machine is running out of fuel. A plant that once operated 3 shifts a day now runs on a single daytime shift with most lines sitting idle. One anonymous engineer put it bluntly, "We've got the technology, the workforce, and the will. But you can't win when everything around you is working against you." He's right. Worthington isn't falling because of internal failure. It's collapsing under the weight of a broken system where competitive advantage has been stripped down to the bone. At Worthington, the fear isn't just about losing a job. It's about losing a home, losing health insurance, losing your kid's future, and losing faith in what was once called the American dream. A dream now being crushed one steel sheet at a time. And when the wave of closures begins to reach even the giants of American industry, the next chapter won't be a warning. It'll be the brutal reality we've been trying not to face. U.S. Steel. Some names don't need advertising, just hearing them calls up the spirit of America. U.S. Steel is one of those names. Once synonymous with the bridges, skyscrapers, and ships that defined American strength, it's now become a cautionary tale across the industrial heartland. Since the start of the year, U.S. Steel has paused operations at no fewer than 3 major facilities in Pennsylvania and Indiana. Not because they ran out of raw materials, not because demand vanished, but because the numbers no longer added up. With import tariffs on raw steel doubling and metallurgical coal and energy prices soaring out of control, the company was forced to make a brutal calculation, keep bleeding tens of millions in quarterly losses, or shut down before the hemorrhaging turns fatal. In the quiet neighborhoods surrounding these plants, life has unraveled. Breakfast diners now open late because the 5 a.m. steelworker rush is gone. Local pharmacies sit empty as families lose their health insurance and can no longer afford even basic medication. School buses return early not because classes are shorter, but because parents can't afford the gas to keep their kids in after-school programs. All of this stems from what was supposed to be a temporary decision to pause production and cut costs. But temporary has stretched into 4 months, and there's no end in sight. The production lines once earmarked for upgrades now sit under layers of dust. Skilled steelworkers once courted by Fortune 500 employers are now filing applications at low-wage warehouses working 3 part-time jobs just to keep the lights on. U.S. steel used to be a pillar holding up the American middle class. Today it's watching that same middle class crumble like brittle steel in a deep winter freeze. Not because America has lost its ability to produce, but because the manufacturing ecosystem can no longer support those who choose to stay and fight. And perhaps the most painful truth: when a brand once known as the backbone of America is forced to dismantle its own foundation, that's when you know a piece of American industry has truly collapsed. But the unraveling doesn't stop with steel. In the distance, the heavy engines that once roared across assembly lines are starting to go silent too. Volvo Mac trucks. They're not luxury cars, not supercars, but for thousands of drivers in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland, a Mac truck is a symbol of hard work and steady income. At the plants where these trucks are built, each vehicle rolling off the line once represented a promise of a stable future. But that promise is now quietly unraveling, undone by a wave of tariffs. Not loud, not flashy, but devastating enough to leave an entire workforce adrift. In just the second quarter of 2025, Volvo Group, the parent company of Mac, cut U.S. truck production by over 30%, translating to thousands of trucks that were simply never made. Soaring tariffs on hot-rolled steel and aluminum, up more than 45%, have added an estimated $4,000 in extra cost to each Mac cab and chassis. At that price point, the company either eats the loss or prices itself out of the American market. At least 2 plants, one in Pennsylvania, another in Virginia, have scaled back to single-shift operations down from 2 or even 3. Night shifts are no longer desirable when daytime hours are already being cut and wages and benefits have taken a hit across the board. Skilled workers are walking away, some switching to gig work, others leaving the industry altogether. The consequences go far beyond the factory floor. Mac trucks play a vital role in construction freight and last-mile delivery, critical links in the American logistics chain. With fewer trucks on the road, shipments are delayed or handed off to international carriers not subject to the same material tariffs. When American trucks stop rolling, American supply chains stall, and that delay impacts everything from food deliveries in rural towns to construction timelines in major cities. Full reliance on imports isn't a real solution either. Foreign trucks come with their own headaches, higher maintenance costs, incompatible fuel systems, limited spare parts. But if domestic trucks become too expensive, buyers will look elsewhere. Volvo Mac is waking up to a harsh truth. These protectionist tariffs weren't a safety net. They're a ticking time bomb, dragging American trucking into a crisis with no easy fix. So when a Mac plant sits silent on a Monday morning, a time that should be buzzing with movement and purpose, it's not a holiday lull. It's a warning unchecked material. Tariffs are breaking the supply chain from the inside out. Builders can't get the trucks they need. Delivery firms are short on power units, and thousands of jobs drivers, technicians, mechanics are hanging by a thread. That familiar sound of tires crunching into a diner parking lot at 5 a.m., the start of a long shift that's the sound of hope of stability of a working-class dream. But when the chassis stops being built, when the factory doors don't open, even those simple mornings start to disappear. And if these massive wheels burdened by tariffs can no longer turn, then the brands we once saw as the future of American pride may also be slowing to a crawl. Stellantis Jeep buys Ram. There were no headlines, no big announcements, but one by one the factory gates of Stellantis plants across America quietly shut. Jeep and Ram, once symbols of American grit, resilience, and freedom, are now stuck in limbo caught between tariff shocks and skyrocketing operational costs. Hundreds of workers in Michigan and Indiana were let go in a string of so-called production pauses, with no timeline, no clarity, and no real promise of a restart. In just 6 months, output has dropped so drastically that the entire supplier ecosystem has begun to collapse. The companies that made everything from chassis to drivetrain parts have stopped receiving orders. A production chain that once ran like a well-oiled machine is now buckling at every joint. And right in the middle of it all are American workers, men and women who once believed that a job on the assembly line meant security, purpose, and pride. One veteran engineer with nearly 30 years of service shared how he was called into the office one morning and told plain and simple, "The line is shutting down. Indefinitely. No contingency plan, no fallback, no word from the union. Just one bitter truth: building trucks in America has become a gamble no one's willing to take." And the dealerships, they're canceling orders, rerouting customers toward foreign vehicles, many of which are also facing rising prices due to broken global logistics. The Ram 1500, once a go-to for working-class Americans, is now priced like a luxury item. When the average American can't afford the product they helped build, it's no longer a crisis, it's a complete failure of a once proud value chain. Behind Stellantis' pause lies a spreadsheet filled with red ink numbers that stretch deeper into the negatives with every passing week. With raw materials, taxed freight costs spiraling, and consumer demand on shaky ground, even a global automaker has its limits. This wasn't a decision, it was a surrender, the result of an unsolvable equation in a market turning against itself. When the final trucks to leave the line are unfinished, when a once bustling factory floor turns into a silent parking lot, there's no need for a bankruptcy press release. The silence speaks volumes. And just like that, another automaker once proud of its nationwide manufacturing footprint starts quietly pulling back, one plant at a time. General Motors. No one ever imagined the day would come when General Motors, a pillar of American industry, would start to shrink. The factories that once ran 24/7, where lights never dimmed and machines thundered like the heartbeat of entire cities, now sit in eerie silence. So quiet, in fact, that you can hear the footsteps of a lone security guard making rounds at the end of the shift. At the Detroit Hamtramck plant, once rolling out thousands of vehicles every week, only a handful of half-built cars remain gathering dust. A shortage of key components, a surge in raw material costs, and unsustainable overhead have forced GM to implement what executives are calling a partial production pause, a softer way of saying, "We're shutting down." But the real concern isn't just in the numbers. It's in the eyes of seasoned workers, people who've weathered economic storms before, but have never seen a horizon this uncertain. Families who've depended on GM paychecks are now cutting back on everything. Local stores are closing their doors. Schools are slashing budgets as tax revenue dries up. This isn't just GM's problem anymore. It's a domino effect hitting the entire supply chain, from a leather seat manufacturer in Tennessee to a metal casting plant in Ohio to a rail freight company in Illinois. One broken link and the whole system starts to unravel. For decades, GM was seen as the backbone of American manufacturing, but now even they are struggling to stay upright. They've tried everything from automation to labor restructuring to cutting non-essential lines. But when a single vehicle rolls off the line costing nearly 30% more than it did just 2 years ago, the issue is no longer internal. It's systemic. The most sobering truth: GM is not alone, and they know it. Because even as the company pours billions into next-gen technologies, it's wrestling with a math problem no one can solve and a future that's slipping out of control. Battery plants. For years, America's battery factories were hailed as the bedrock of the Green Revolution, the lifeline for an industrial sector desperate to break free from fossil fuels. But now inside lithium-ion production facilities in places like Nevada and Michigan, the silence is deafening, not the quiet of progress, but the quiet of financial pressure closing in. The prices of lithium, cobalt, and nickel, the holy trinity of EV battery materials, have skyrocketed over the past 18 months. Disrupted global supply chains combined with suppliers chasing higher bids abroad have left U.S. factories scrambling. At the same time, domestic production costs have surged while subsidies that once propped up the sector have plateaued. The result: these green factories are quietly slipping into the red. Investors who once believed that if you build it, profit will come, are now pulling out discreetly. Advanced battery assembly lines, once celebrated in headlines as breakthroughs in clean tech, are now running at half capacity or completely idle due to material shortages. Some EV automakers have even resorted to importing batteries, a move once considered a betrayal of America's clean energy independence. And it doesn't stop with manufacturing. Battery technician training programs across the country are being canceled due to low enrollment. Students who studied renewable energy with hope are now struggling to find work as factories freeze hiring and shelve expansion plans. The dream of a new Detroit, this time powered by batteries, not gasoline, is quietly falling apart under market pressure. Emergency summits have been held in Michigan and California, with state leaders scrambling to organize relief packages. But so far, the aid hasn't been enough. Small towns that once welcomed battery plants with open arms are now facing rising unemployment, declining tax revenues, and a nagging question: was the promise of a green future just another illusion? And before the energy sector even has time to regroup, another cornerstone of American heavy industry, once considered essential to the modern supply chain, is starting to crack under its own weight. Alcoa. Deep in the industrial heartlands of southern Indiana and along the forested fringes of Tennessee, where the clang of metal presses and the roar of smelting furnaces once echoed around the clock, a different kind of sound now dominates a heavy, uneasy silence. At Alcoa's aluminum plants, hundreds of workers have been placed on rotating furloughs. Not because orders dried up, but because the company can no longer afford to keep the lights on in a manufacturing climate that's becoming brutally unforgiving. Aluminum production in the US has never been easy. It demands massive energy, steady raw materials, and most importantly, protection from the chaos of global commodity markets. In 2025, all three pillars are collapsing at once. Electricity prices have doubled in just 14 months, driving smelter operation costs through the roof. Meanwhile, key bauxite shipments from South America have been suspended due to political unrest, choking off the essential supply chain. Locals near Alcoa's factories describe the scene as machines without life. Gigantic steel conveyors now sit motionless like the fossilized remains of a forgotten industrial age. Nearby towns are reeling. City councils have been forced to cancel infrastructure upgrades once funded by industrial tax revenue. Schools are short on funding, hospitals are cutting shifts, and weekend farmers markets, once a sign of small-town vitality, have dwindled to a handful of lonely stalls. But the most alarming threat isn't just economic, it's generational. When smelting plants like Alcoa shut down, rebuilding the supply chain is painfully slow and costly. The specialized skills required for metallurgy can't be retrained overnight. Every shuttered facility doesn't just mean lost jobs, it means an entire generation of industrial knowledge disappearing. And just as these traditional manufacturing hubs struggle with the aftershocks of halted production, another industry once the epitome of American cool and consumer convenience is now feeling the burn of a cost crisis that few saw coming. Carrier. For decades, air conditioning has been a symbol of American comfort, the cool breeze that made homes livable in the Arizona desert and kept Florida hospitals running through sweltering summers. And no name was more closely tied to that promise than Carrier. But in a twist of cruel irony, the very machines built to fight the heat have become victims of a storm of economic pressures unlike anything seen in generations. Carrier's Indiana plant once employed thousands and stood as the economic backbone of the region. But by June 2025, everything changed fast and hard. The cost of production has tripled in under 2 years as prices for copper, aluminum, and especially stainless steel spiraled out of control. Today, a single AC unit can cost more than a high-end refrigerator did just a few years ago. It's not just raw materials. Even domestic logistics, the simple act of moving products across state lines, has become wildly expensive. Industrial freight trains have been deprioritized and fuel prices have stayed pinned near record highs not seen since 2022. Carrier, once determined to export American-made air conditioners to the world, is now struggling to deliver them within its own borders. And perhaps worst of all, air conditioning is a seasonal business. Carrier's entire revenue model hinges on just a few hot months a year. So when operating costs soar, sales drop, and distribution slows, all it takes is one off-season to send the company's entire financial structure into a free fall. Add to that cutthroat competition from cheaper imports that aren't burdened by the same domestic costs, and the pressure becomes unsustainable. Faced with this grim reality, Carrier has cut back. Production lines have been slowed, shifts reduced, and seasonal contracts canceled. Massive metal presses now sit idle. Overhead cranes hang still more decorative than functional. For many families who once relied on this factory, what was once the American dream has turned into an industrial nightmare. That refreshing cool breeze has turned into something else entirely, a chilling wind of uncertainty. Not from an AC unit, but from layoff notices, empty paychecks, and a growing fear that no one is safe. And Carrier's not alone in this downward spiral. What's happening now is no longer just a warning, it's a reality crashing down on the American working class. When factories that once symbolized security go dark, and brands once hailed as national pride retreat from their own soil, it begs the question, is there still an American dream left for the next generation of workers? Because if even the biggest, most established corporations can't hold the line, who's next? Your family, your neighbors, or maybe you. This video does not promote division or advocate for secession. All content is presented for the purpose of analysis, awareness, and public discussion based on current events, emotions, and social trends. We fully respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal regulations. If you found this video helpful, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the stories that mainstream media too often ignores. Our analyses are grounded in real data and independent perspectives. We don't aim to predict the future, but we hope to help our community reflect, prepare, and act while there's still time.